Welcome to the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast. I'm Theo Gremminger. Alan Sislowski is not with us this week. Alan's doing well. I spoke to him this morning, but he's a little bit jammed up. So Matt and I, we're like, we got to bring in a guest, and I'm like, I got the guy. And Matt's like, who's the guy? I'm like, Andrew Cooper, and Matt's all about that. So we're stoked to have Andrew Cooper joining us here. We're doing Dynasty Landmines. Coop, you came on with me on First Class Fantasy like 2 weeks ago. You've been on press coverage. You've been on Mind to Mansion. You're like a regular here at Player Profiler, and we're so excited to have you at Sonic Truth, man. How's everything going today?
Yeah, man. It's funny that going way back, you and the Dynasty Goat podcast, that was one of the first shows I did personally. And this show, the Sonic Truth, way back in the day, was one of the first shows I listened to. In fact, I've told Matt in the past that I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for this channel, because I used to listen to all these different shows, and I'm not going to name any by name, but it's just a bunch of guys, and they're like, "Oh, how do you feel about Tank Dell? Good, bad, no." Watching this show was the first time I was like, "Oh, wait a second, this doesn't have to be boring. Like, this can be fun. This can be funny, right? You can be a little rude. You can have a little fun." And that was the time where I was like, you know what? I think I could do this and not have to do it like all the boring talking heads. So glad to be on with you guys.
We have landmines, right? There are landmines, and we have some landmines that I think we're going to talk about players that you probably shouldn't be drafting given their ADPs right now in the way too early startups in the marketplace, and players that we've liked in the past that maybe now it's time to trade. That there are just reasons why fundamentally, and I'm more of a systems guy. I just have systems. I try not to get too loyal to particular players, especially players that I had, correct opinions about in previous years, end up loading up. My exposure is huge on these guys. You need to know when, okay, now is the time when the price is inflated. It's probably not going to get much higher. You might as well cash out. You might as well, go for your treasure trove of picks, right? Start to build that war chest of picks. If you're going to be trading guys, we have some guys to trade today, and I'll start. I'm just going to kick it off, and I'm going to pick the highest ranked player on the Player Profiler Dynasty rankings that I believe is a potential landmine, and he is. I'll tell you, he's the number 12, player 12 in single quarterback leagues. And when you look at the running back position, he is RB5 on our rankings. PlayerProfiler.com. Go to the Dynasty rankings. It's in Dynasty Deluxe. It's also in the player rankings. So you can either go to the player rankings and get seasonal rankings, weekly projections, all those things, including offensive line, cornerback rankings, but Dynasty rankings are part of that service. You could also subscribe to our Dynasty Deluxe package. The Dynasty Deluxe package has a draft planner, the trade analyzer, mock drafts, ADP tracker, lots of cool stuff. That player, RB5, on our Dynasty rankings, on Player Profiler, is Devon Achane. And
Don't do it, Matt.
Devon Achane is explosive. Devon Achane is bringing excitement and the incredible, unsustainable yards per carry. And the running backs that on another team, in another situation, couldn't possibly be as productive and efficient are the running backs that make me nervous, and I'm ready to cash them out as soon as they, rise quickly up the rankings. It's a different story if you're talking about a guy like a Breece Hall. Breece Hall is on the other side of the spectrum in that he was super productive in college. He has the all-purpose skill set that anyone would want on a real NFL team or in Dynasty. And he's been on a team with a below-average offensive line and a below-average scoring offense. So that's a player that I'm just trying to acquire wherever possible, as long as I can get some kind of discount for the fact that he's on the Jets and he hasn't been as productive as he was sold to be a couple of years ago. We know why. Injuries and situation, but not the player himself. What players have benefited from their situation? We talked to John Lobb, who's going to be featured on this channel He does a lot of prospect analysis on Twitter. What's John's Twitter handle, Theo?
It's let me actually pull
Isn't
that up.
Isn't he the FF Scholar?
Yeah, FF Scholar. FF Scholar. We're so excited to have John and also Dan Williamson. So we've added 2 really high quality Dynasty minds.
Great dudes.
John's about as good as it gets in terms of like film study of prospects. Like sit down, watch 6 games, and can tell you about a guy. He's been really, really good hits over the years. His QB1 last year, much like, actually he had him ahead of Richardson, was CJ Stroud.
There you
John
go.
Lobb was well ahead on CJ Stroud. A bunch of hits over the years for John. And then Dan Williamson, he's also going to be contributing to us Dynasty content-wise. Andrew knows him well from the GOAT District. Very great high-stakes player. Really good podcaster, really good writer. Dan wrote for Sports Illustrated, wrote for RotoViz. He's going to write for Player Profiler and do some very deep, detailed Dynasty articles for us. So we're really rolling at the Dynasty. But I'll tell you what's not rolling, Matt, is your take on selling my guy,
Simply the best. We have the best people here. And we were talking to John Lobb. I asked him, I said, John, where were you at with Achane last year? He said, well, pre-draft, I was below market on Achane, and then I quickly corrected as soon as he landed on the Dolphins in that stretch zone running scheme. That's the perfect skill match, team match, situation match that you could have asked for of any player in the draft. Offense, defense, the best system match was Devon Achane going to the Dolphins, and as soon as I saw that landing spot, I flipped and I became well ahead of market on him. So that was John Lobb being right every way, right? He knew when to adjust and when situations actually matter. And I discount running backs whose efficiency is driven largely by long explosive runs. He is explosive, but on another team with a different system or different offensive lineman, like the Dolphins have invested in like interior offensive line, and you think about the best offensive linemen that we've talked about in the draft, in the second round, in recent years. I love anyone that listens to the Decision Point show knows I love drafting guards in the second round. Robert Hunt was one of my favorite picks in the last few years in the second round. And then Steve Avila with the Rams last year. So this is the reason why. It's not necessarily Achane. You put Achane on another team, on the Patriots or some other team where he has to go and grind out yards on his own, it's a completely different outcome and production. I think that if he were on a different team, it's conceivable that his total fantasy points could have been cut by 75% last year.
I don't know about that.
And
well, I got to ask.
In that situation, the player's value is being inflated by the team that he's on. And in that particular case, I view that player as a landmine and a sell candidate.
Well, I got to ask then, what do you think is going to happen? Because they got Teron Armstead. They have Alec Ingold. They did a good job of building that offense from the 49ers, what they run. I guess you could make the suggestion that these guys have been hot hand coaches and that maybe he isn't at the Christian McCaffrey level where the job is entirely his and he's going to get every start moving forward. But with running backs, the window of productivity usually is their rookie team, right? So what's the worst case scenario in this event? That they do continue with Raheem Mostert, who, he's 31, or they find a new Mostert and mix and match, Matt? Like what's the concern?
He had less than 1,000 total yards, but 11 touchdowns. So a rule of thumb, like I said, I'm a systems guy. There are just rules of thumb, and I try to just, even though he's a 4.3 running back at the combine, he ran a 4.3. That Chris Johnson is his best comparable player on PlayerProfiler.com. This is a player I am wired to love. Okay, but if you're going to go out and score 11 touchdowns on less than 1,000 yards, then your fantasy points, 17 plus fantasy points per game, that's a sell. Just on principle, that's a sell because anything can happen. Something could happen to Tua. Something could happen to Hunt. Teron Armstead is 40 years old, right? So we've seen this in the NFL. Every year there's a couple teams that the offensive line just crumbles, and now you need to go ahead and make yards and produce on your own, like we saw with Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley has that ability. We thought that the Giants had the potential of taking a step forward. They actually took a step backward, right, with their offensive line because of injuries. Well, it didn't matter as much with Saquon Barkley because he can create yards on his own with agility, elusiveness, and incredible receiving skills. Devon Achane didn't even have 30 catches last year. He had 27 catches. I know it was only in 11 games.
27 catches in 11 games.
Yeah,
and
it's
Matt,
three and a half targets a game. 3.5 targets a game is good. It's good. It's just he was competing with Raheem Mostert, and every year there is going to be a Raheem Mostert on the Dolphins. There's no way, there's zero probability that any NFL team is going to say, hey, 188-pound running back, you're now our bell cow. That's just not a thing. So now you're living on efficiency. And efficiency for a running back, as I mentioned, is dependent on the supporting cast. And that should terrify anyone that has Achane.
The targets went way up from week 14 on. And I think in his range of possibilities, going from 27 catches to being a 60 catch guy is a very appropriate outcome for year 2. I think like
7.7 yards per touch, 1.36 fantasy points per opportunity. These are unsustainable stats. Just
he's
period.
Also thriving. He's also thriving with one of the highest scoring running backs in the NFL this year, in Raheem Mostert, who had a dream season and potentially.
And they're going to draft another guy, and they're going to sign another guy.
I don't know.
This is the fallacy. This is the classic dynasty fallacy.
I'll tell you what.
As if Mostert's just going to fade away, and they're not going to backfill him with anybody. How many great running backs are in this free agent class? And all they have, in quotes, is Mostert and a 3rd-round pick. See, that's how a GM thinks. A GM doesn't think like a fantasy gamer. A GM doesn't think, oh, we're fine with Achane. He put up 17-plus fantasy points per game. We can give him more carries, and he's going to go to 20. They don't think that way. They think, we have a pretty big need at running back. We've got a journeyman, multiple 3 journeymen, and a 3rd-rounder. That's how the GM thinks. So there's also the possibility that they go and sign a premium running back from this free agent class, or it's less likely that they draft someone that could compete with Achane just because it's such a weak running back class. But I'm more concerned about a free agent coming in and it being the surprise landing spot for some free agent. But again, when you talk to actual front office personnel, they don't see their backfield as being a finished product, even though they were putting up 30-plus fantasy points per game. The fantasy gamer's like, it can't get... There's only going to be more opportunity for Devon Achane next year. That's not necessarily true.
Okay, but I think it's going to be the exact same 2 guys next year. It's going to be Mostert, who's got less than 700 career carries, and they have him on a team-friendly deal, and Mostert will be back, and it'll be Achane. And at the end of the day... Yeah, go ahead.
If they use those 2 guys the same way that they did this year, then Matt will be right. Because Mostert was a goal line back. He was the preferred back on virtually every down. Right?
Achane's 188 pounds. Of course he's not the goal line back.
Achane could be, if you're trading Devon Achane like Matt's saying, you better be getting an absolute haul.
Yes.
Because Devon Achane, you might be trading away Jamal Charles, guys, and you might be trading a guy.
We don't necessarily say, hey, we're gonna punish this guy in the dynasty rankings. No, we have him at RB5 because you can go out and get Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne plus for Devon Achane right now. Like, we know what we're doing. Clearly, when you go to our dynasty rankings on Player Profiler, we know what we're doing, but we also know when to hold them and know when to fold them.
4 top 5 weeks as a rookie and an additional week where he was top 8. And this is a player, guys, where, again, the receiving upside is going to be there next year. This is a guy who looks really good with the ball in his hands in space. And in year 2, they're going to trust him more as a receiver out of the backfield. And you bring up the explosive rate. He could regress a yard, and he's still, a yard per carry. He could regress a yard and a half per carry, and he's still one of the most explosive backs in football. And I just look at all the numbers, and I think this is a guy that he's a complete difference maker. And Matt, you bring up like Breece Hall. I can get Achane for cheaper. So it's like he's in that wheelhouse. The same, things you bring up, the weight, the how he missed time this year. All those things resonate in people's minds. I think this could actually be a potential last time to buy Achane, because if he plays a full season next year, window's closed.
I never said anything about the missed games. I never said anything about him being prone to injury, which he is. When the injury finder comes out, you look at a player of that size that already has an injury history in both college now and in the pros. The problem with a dependent running back is that you're not just worried about him, you're worried about the torn meniscus for Robert Hunt and the torn meniscus for Devon Achane. That's the problem. It makes it the fragility of the offensive line is part of the fragility of this running back more than almost any other running back. Now, there's another running back that I have on my list, which we're going to get to much later, and the thesis is very similar.
Coop, get my back. Tell Matt that he's wrong here.
You know what? Honestly, I hate to split the difference on this. I will say this. When you talk about a true landmine, I don't think Achane's going to be a guy that he goes from being in your lineup to being on the bench and a guy you can't start, which I think is that's what when you're saying a landmine. But he does have a good point about a sell, because you want guys like, think about Christian McCaffrey. He is so locked in his role. And you can say that about Breece Hall, ETN, Jonathan Taylor, like they are the guy, whereas we don't know for sure. So the upside is to be the Christian McCaffrey type in an offense that's built by the same people, right? It's the same. It's like, if the 49ers are the Lexus, you're driving a Toyota Avalon, and the Texans over there are the Camry or whatever. Like, it's all built by the same people, right? So if you have that guy, like, he has that upside. But the concern, of course, as Matt is pointing out, is that they don't have to do that. And we've done this before. People, if you sold Elijah Mitchell, that was the true landmine where people were like, oh boy, Elijah Mitchell, here we go. Like, I got him in this offense. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. And then he got vaporized, right?
Thank you.
So
Guys,
I don't think
the thing
I
is,
don't think it's
as
bad.
the favorite thing
Mitchell.
about this, and Alan needs to be careful. Alan Soslowski, wherever you are, Alan, I know you're listening, you need to be careful, because in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm not mentioning two things. I'm not mentioning injuries, and I'm not mentioning Elijah Mitchell. I'm going to make my case without mentioning those two things. And the other members of the show are helping my argument, Alan. This is symbiosis right here. You've got to make sure that wherever you are, you're sharpening your blade for the next show, my friend.
Guys, you bring up you lost me at Elijah Mitchell here, Coop. You lost me big time at Elijah Mitchell.
I've seen it. I didn't say he was Elijah Mitchell. You're saying that. You're implying that I said that.
You guys want me to make your argument.
I didn't say that. I'm saying that it's not set in stone just yet, because he didn't beat out Raheem Mostert. If he had beaten out Raheem Mostert, then we sit here and say, boy, I did it.
Well, there was also
he did never fully beat out Isaiah Spiller.
Okay, so let's
This
backtrack
is the problem.
step on this.
If you just said to yourself, if a non-bell cow profile running back reaches the top 5, I'm immediately trading them. If you just have that system in place, if you create an AI bot to help you run your fantasy team, I'm helping you right now program your AI bot. That's all we're doing. And then we're going to get to, I know you guys have a lot of landmines. We're going to get to you after this. This episode is brought to you by Rival Fantasy. Rival Fantasy, the coolest fantasy platform not enough people know about, but they will once I'm done, baby, because they're always innovating. They just rolled out seasonal leagues. We set them up for patrons, for our listeners, and they funded over $1,000 in payouts. That's what Rival's all about. They're always innovating. They already had the fantasy book where you can take overs and unders, stack them up, multiply your payout, but then they added challenges so you can set your own lines and put them out there for the community, and then you can browse the community's lines and say, hey, this guy's crazy, I'm going to take the other side. It's cool. And they have fantasy bingo. Rival Fantasy is reminding me how much fun I can have with fantasy football, and use that promo code PLAYER. The promo code is PLAYER. They give you a $100 instant deposit match plus $25 plus a free play. That promo code is PLAYER for up to $125 in deposit bonus and a free play. You can't beat it. All right, we're not turning Devon Achane into a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor debate. We're not going to do it. We could. You know what? We could. I just want to make sure people know we're built for this. And if we had to, if all of our families were locked in a basement, and the only way to get to free them was if we did an hour and a half on Devon Achane, buy or sell, we could do it. I just want to let everyone know we could do it easily. Baby, come on! Oh, I love you so much. You're free. I did it. You know?
Well,
we could do it. We could do it, and our families would be fine. You know, but we're not. You guys have other guys to talk about. We want to create a whole list of people to go through their rosters and put people on the block.
So I want to let the chat. Are you with Matt? Is Devon Achane a dynasty sell, a dynasty landmine? Or are you with me, who wants to buy or hold Achane? And I want to give a quick preface on Andrew's got a guy that he wants to sell, and this is very spicy. And let's give a little bit of history here with Coop. Coop can talk anything when it comes to fantasy. He can talk dynasty. He can talk redraft. He can talk best ball. I've talked everything with him. But what you're most known for in this space, Andrew, and you become like a Matt Harmon, but with tight ends, where you look at the tight end position and you analyze it just about as well as anybody, if not the best right now in fantasy. And the guy that you have as a landmine is going to raise some eyebrows because he just went ham in his year 2 season, and he had a fantastic playoff game. So why don't you go ahead and drop that one on the Sonic Truth audience?
Yeah, I'll hit you with it, man. I appreciate the praise. And I'll tell you what, as a guy that analyzes a lot of tight ends and does a lot of that work, your new guy, Dan Williamson, I've talked to him for a long time. I think he's got a little bit of that tight end whisper in him too. You know,
you guys have a secret handshake. It's like
the secret handshake.
When you see Coop at the mall, you give him like this. It's like the tight end whispers all go around and like
And Theo's like trying to look. He's trying to see what it is.
What's up, guys?
He's got like
a club.
He's got like a couple of the moves, but doesn't have it quite right.
They don't show them all. They don't show them all.
No, we can't. But no, he's good, man. I spend a lot of time looking at this from a lot of different angles, and at the end of the day, it really boils down to scheme, opportunity, and talent, right? You need all three. And the perfect example is a guy like Mike Gesicki, who, when the scheme with Adam Gase was bad for tight ends, right, then he was terrible. He's blocking on like 20% of his pass plays. When Chan Gailey came in, who uses tight ends basically as wide receivers, he was great, right? So like the scheme is huge. Opportunity obviously is based on the other pass catchers and also who the quarterback is. And then the talent is the player themselves. And a lot of people like this player I'm about to name right now. And he actually just had a 3-touchdown game. So he's steamed up. Jake Ferguson is a guy that I not only would say is a sell. So Matt was saying, Achane, he's a sell because we still think he's going to have value. You probably can start him, but he's steamed up too far. I'll go as far as say Jake Ferguson is a full-on landmine that is going to end up on your bench and a guy you can't use a la Austin Hooper, right? And if you look at Jake Ferguson and Dalton Schultz and Austin Hooper on Player Profiler and look at the best comparable player for those guys, it's Austin Hooper. I mean, the guy in a nutshell, not big, not fast, not particularly athletic. Right. And that's the problem with Hooper. Hooper was on an offense that was top 5 in passing with the Falcons, was a tight end 6. And then he left to different opportunities. And guess what? The wheels fell off. Right. And I look at a guy like Jake Ferguson, and he isn't particularly exciting with the ball in his hands. He doesn't create for himself. He scores on screen passes. He scores because he's been forgotten about. And at the end of the day, those are the guys that you want to sell. Right? You want to sell these guys that are hiding. He's hiding in the bushes, man. He's hiding in the bushes, and he pops out, and he's like, look what I got. Right?
What a great system you have. Your system is find guys that score because the defense says, whoops.
Oops.
Robert Tonyan. See that guy? I forgot about that guy. Whoops, we forgot. All the whoops we forgot guys, sell.
Yeah. Robert Tonyan, 11 whoops we forgot touchdowns, and look what happened with him. right?
Yeah.
Like, so we look at this guy and people will say, oh, Dak Prescott loves the tight end. Well, the last 2 years, CeeDee Lamb has 150 targets and this year at 181. So nobody ever says, oh, Dak Prescott loves throwing the wide receivers. It's always tight end where they're like, the quarterback loves that guy. Statistically speaking, there are no quarterbacks that quote unquote love the tight end. When you go through the obvious names, they're right in the middle of the pack. So what you're doing here is you're hoping that the Dallas Cowboys don't go out and get a viable wide receiver too. Brandon Cooks had 650 yards this year, right? Michael Gallup disappeared, ended up splitting time with Jalen Tolbert. They need another pass catcher, right? And
Michael Gallup, a former Dynasty landmine.
Disappeared, splitting with Jalen Tolbert, man. So like they bring in one wide receiver, you're dust. Also,
I have a player that I think is very similar to Michael Gallup. We're going to talk about later.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, and I'll say this. Let me just say real quick. They also, people don't realize that on 2 separate occasions, people close to the team said that they were interested in trading for Zach Ertz, both before the season and at the trade deadline. But Zach Ertz got hurt, and that kind of fell off the table. But Zach Ertz could easily been a Cowboy. And then you're looking around and you're saying, gross. And even on top of all that, Peyton Hendershot was splitting, and I hate to throw a Peyton Hendershot out there on the show, but I will, that he was actually playing time in the slot before he got hurt, both last year and this year. So I just worry that Jake Ferguson, is he a focal point of an offense that you build around, a la a Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews or Sam Laporta or all these guys, even a Darren Waller or George Kittle, that you say, okay, we got this guy, so we don't need another guy, or the Cowboys sitting around and saying, are we just going to keep throwing to Jake Ferguson 100 times, or maybe we need a second wide receiver besides CeeDee Lamb? And that's my concern, and that's why I'm selling.
So let me just push back on one thing with Ferguson. You bring up like the Dak, tight end finishes, but Coop, tight end 11, tight end 3, tight end 10, and then tight end 9 for Ferguson in his first year that he gets expanded time. And I'll say this: you brought up the fact that he was targeted 100 times. He had 96 targets, and he only caught 6 touchdowns.
If your tight end is tight end 11 in Dynasty, you know what that makes you? A loser. That makes you that means you're scrapping for that third place trophy. You're barely getting your fingers on it. This is a top
when they're in the red zone.
Top heavy sport, is it not? Dynasty is a top heavy league. If you don't have a top 5 or 6 tight end, you mathematically have a below average tight end. I mean, that's math in 10 or 12 team leagues. And every team, that's the difference maker for a lot of these dynasty leagues, is every team that makes the playoffs is loaded up, right? It's the guys that have the good quarterbacks and tight ends and defenses that move the needle. So if I have tight end 11, I consider myself in need of a tight end.
How many of these mid tight ends do we have to see have big seasons and then disappear forever, to be seen from never again, right? I mean, what was it? Last year was Greg Dulcich, right? And Greg Dulcich actually is more athletic than Jake Ferguson. Jake Dulcich is actually interesting. Some of these guys that you're never heard from again, they're actually athletic. It's the guys that the most scary is when they're actually not athletic. I mean, this is a Tyler Higbee situation. I mean, how many different seasons has Tyler Higbee been sold to us as a value, and he can never replicate that 1 year that he had, right? I mean, that's the thing. Tyler Higbee had 1 year with 734 yards, and no other season did he even get past 620. Right?
And in that year, they were playing shells.
And guess what? Guess where he finished that year? Tight end 10.
Ew.
Yeah, Higbee was the incredible finish where he won all the people the money in the fantasy playoffs, and it was like the recency bias with it. The recency bias with Ferguson, though, like Coop, I'll say this. Before the 3 touchdown playoff game, I think he was a hold, but you always use the recency bias for whatever it's worth, whether it's redraft, whether it's dynasty, whether it's best ball. People always amplify that playoff sample size over what we had in the entire regular season. And he's a second-year player, and he just caught 3 touchdown passes in an NFL playoff game. Then he's by definition a sell. So I was neutral on Ferguson. You kind of got me thinking. But you have the playoff thing, the crutch to sell him right now and get some draft picks, especially with, this draft class. Like, you bring up the athleticism of players. Like, you can trade right now Jake Ferguson for essentially Jatavian Sanders plus, which a year ago you would have gotten laughed out of town for that.
Okay,
to use a word from the Sonic Truth glossary, it's vividness bias is the word you're looking for there. The same thing that we saw with Gabe Davis, the big game that has everybody like, wow, this guy just broke out and he's a star. Did Jake Ferguson break out because he had a 3-touchdown game, or did he just kind of fall backwards into play action touchdowns at the goal line? That's what you got to ask yourself.
Well, the funny thing about Ferguson is he didn't even do it with efficiency last year, okay? He just did it with pure volume because his expected fantasy points per game was actually 13.0 because he led the league in red zone targets, okay? 3rd in routes run, number 1 in red zone targets, and still finished with 10.5 fantasy points per game. Computer systems, the AI bots, thought that he would finish with 13 fantasy points per game because his ADOT is 5. His target depth was outside the top 30 qualified tight ends. And this is a guy that we knew had a low yards per carry in college. He was a volume-dependent tight end at Wisconsin, right? Because why? He runs a 4.8. This is all on Player Profiler. Everything you need to know about staying the hell away from Jake Ferguson is right there in his numbers at Wisconsin and his numbers last year, both the opportunity and the efficiency metrics. It all paints a story of a guy who is a lesser Tyler Higbee, right? A lesser Dalton Schultz, a complete stay away. It's the perfect example of a guy that has the vividness bias where you could sell him now, get the hell out of there, and run. Theo, who do you got?
Well, I got one, and it's a player that I think it's cash out time, and it's DK Metcalf. And it's a tough one because this is a player that we all like. We all think DK Metcalf is a very talented football player, but it's sort of he is what he is. And it's sort of like for years and years, it feels like we've been waiting for that DK Metcalf season, that incredible season. And when it comes down to it, guys, he has 1 year, which was 2020, where he had 17 points per game. He gave you an incredibly impactful fantasy finish, and that's his only year where he finished as a wide receiver 1 in terms of points per game. Ever since then, he is what he is. I think if you ask people DK Metcalf's wide receiver finish, they're always going to guess about 6 spots higher because you have in the back of your mind's eye DK making these incredible, physical, overwhelming plays in the end zone over some hapless defender that he outweighs by 30 pounds. And he looks fantastic doing it. But when it comes down to it, he finishes at 14.4 points per game, 13.3 points per game, and 14.1 points per game. That's wide receiver 20, wide receiver 24, and wide receiver 22. Mm-hmm. So he's a back-end wide receiver 2 that the market treats like a back-end wide receiver 1 based on the name, based on the market for him. And I think there's a perception that some people think Shane Waldron was bad for DK, which I don't. Shane Waldron got a lot out of DK and a lot out of Tyler Lockett. DK actually had his only 140 or more target season under Shane Waldron, but people wanted more. They wanted him, to score 1 million fantasy points and be Devontae Adams. It's just not what he is. Now you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, a player who we think is going to go way up in targets this year in year 2. You have a new coach and a new philosophy with the offense. DK Metcalf, to me, is a purgatory player in Dynasty that's only getting older. I'd be looking to sell. And Matt and I, with Alan last offseason, we talked about how this Dynasty class of 2023 was going to be transformative at the tight end position, which we were correct on. Laporta and Kincaid are in everybody's top 5. We said it was going to be transformative at the running back position with Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs in everybody's top 5 now. We were correct. Devon Achane in our top 5 at Player Profiler. This year is going to be like that with the wide receiver position. A lot of these wide receivers who are currently wide receiver 2s a year from now are going to be wide receiver 3s on the market because they're going to get nuked by some of these guys coming in the league like Harrison Jr. and Adunze, and not even mentioning Malik Neighbors. And there's several other guys. You might have 7 wide receivers selected in the first round of the NFL draft. So sell DK Metcalf, use him as a pathway to get one of these wide receivers that's going to go in the first round plus, or you can pivot in a 2-for-1 where DK is still a massive piece where I could go and trade up for a guy like Matt mentioned with Breece Hall. I could offer you DK Metcalf and a running back, potentially getting the talks for Breece Hall.
we're going to get into DK Metcalf in a moment, but I do want to give some feedback from the audience. They all agree with Andrew Cooper. We've got some great nicknames. Turd Ferguson, right? Which I love Turd Ferguson. That, I believe, is Norm Macdonald playing Norm Macdonald
Burt Reynolds.
playing Burt Reynolds, right? Smokey and the Bandit. On Jeopardy on Saturday Night Live, he wrote in his name as Turd Ferguson, and so I love Turd Ferguson. That's his name. It's T-E-R-D Ferguson. Okay, so that's locked in. Theo, we can never be bullish on Ferguson ever again because of that nickname. And Joe Carlton in the chat. This is why we love trading guys like this, especially before the season ends. He traded him at some point last year, and the pick ended up being the 201. Can you imagine trading Ferguson for the 201? Can you imagine? Can you imagine the receiver you're going to get this year for that? I mean, that's a masterstroke. Joe Carlton, masterstroke.
Shout out to Joe Carlton is a very good high stakes player. We know Joe.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, 201, baby. Let's go. That's the thing is that people always hit me up and they're like, oh, you're drafting tight ends early. You love tight ends. You must be drafting Travis Kelce in every league. And it's like, no. That's not how it works with tight ends. In general, you can generate value. But if you care at all, then it's easy to generate value. And in Dynasty, that's the easiest place to get value. I mean, I was drafting Sam Laporta and Dalton Kincaid because people weren't respecting them. But beyond that, I typically don't do that. I usually wait on tight ends because if you think about it, Mark Andrews wasn't the first tight end drafted on his own team. George Kittle was a 5th-round pick that was drafted because he was roommates with C.J. Beathard, right? These guys come out of the woodwork, right? Logan Thomas finished like tight end 3 one year. He was a quarterback in college. He didn't even play tight end, right? Like these guys come out of nowhere, man. So if you're at any position, if you're going to fade it and cobble it together, then do it. And we'll follow me on Twitter at Coupe Fiasco. We'll do it together. We'll go to Looney Bin together because I'm always digging and trying to find these guys.
And there's guys that we know are fantastic. A guy that, was the greatest yards after the catch tight end in history at the college level with, DK Metcalf level physicality and physique was David Njoku. All you had to do was just truther for David Njoku and just keep him on your taxi squad indefinitely, knowing that the people at Player Profiler said this guy looks like a breakout tight end at some point. It just happened to happen in his age 27 season. It's not uncommon for a super athletic tight end to finally get in the right situation and break out at age 27. So that's the type of player you should be targeting. And we had a big ranking summit a couple days ago, and when we were in the tight end section, I had to step up and I said, hey, listen, guys, I get that there's exciting tight ends in the water. Like it's just, you want to jump in, but our brand has been treated incredibly well by, as a rule, being below market on tight ends across the board. It has served us incredibly well for close to 10 years. And just to know that's the kind of headwind you're going up against. You want to vault one of these tight ends, so every time you go to our rankings, you're like, well, I got to keep scrolling to get to another tight end. That is by design, and it works consistently year over year. The turnover in the top 12 of the tight end position is unlike any other position there is out there. And now talking about DK Metcalf is a classic sell in that he is a classic sports car. He's a British sports car, right? British sports cars look great. They're so beautiful. They're like works of art. And then to drive them, you're better off driving a Subaru, right? There are literal Subaru cars that will perform better than any British sports car on the road. But again, you can't can't drive down the road. You're not going to get people turning their head, right? That's the difference, right? So DK Metcalf walks into the facility, people turn their heads, right? Tyler Lockett walks into the facility, no one notices, right? That's the difference. So that's the guy that I'm happy drafting a guy like DK Metcalf, knowing that as soon as he has a few big games, he's going on the block because I know that guy is going to retain value. That's the thing about a guy like DK Metcalf is we're not saying don't draft him. Guys like that are always going to have value because they have the sex appeal. So in that way, they're a little bit insulated to having some unproductive weeks. You're always going to be able to flip them. But you look at where we have DK Metcalf on our rankings, we are realists. He is not in the top 20.
Right. I think with DK Metcalf, he has the upside in him. We've seen the on-field speed, and obviously he's very strong. I think that he just, honestly, from what I've seen and heard from this guy, I think he just needs to take it a little more seriously, to be honest. I worry he's got a little bit of that Dwight Howard in him, where he's been the biggest, strongest guy forever, and he doesn't need to develop an up and under. He doesn't need to develop these tricks and the tools of the trade. The more
haven't you heard him interviewed?
He's talking about candy and eating
candy
all day.
He said the greatest thing now is that you can just order candy and they'll deliver it to your house or they'll deliver it to the facility. He's like, I ordered boxes and bags of candy and Sour Patch Kids and Skittles and all these things, and they send them to my house, and it's unbelievable. He's like, this is the greatest innovation in technology, and I'm like, whoa, what? Wait,
so
you're eating Skittles?
Right?
This is Devontae Parker all over again.
No, it's crazier. DK Metcalf is very open about his diet. So right now, people are into intermittent fasting, and people do the 1 meal a day. There's the 1 meal a day people. DK Metcalf basically does the 1 meal a day plus, like what you said, Matt. He says he consumes 3 massive bags of candy.
Right.
Coffee, 3 massive bags of candy, and then he eats a big dinner. He's a physical specimen and a genetic freak. But like Coop says, those kind of guys who don't take a step back and change up the diet, and as they get closer to 30, they age a lot more quickly than another 26-year-old. And I'm not going to sit here criticizing DK Metcalf. I'm sure the guy can lift the weight room, and he's certainly still got the speed. But at the end of the day, that's super weird lifestyle.
You can until you can't, though. You can until you can't.
I will say, though, and now we've seen this before, there is the possibility that he pulls, and again, the player I'm about to name was on another level. We're not talking about candy, we're talking about drugs. But Chris Carter was a guy that did have that moment. And he did say, hey, you know what? I just got traded to Minnesota. I just got traded to the wall, right? I'm up here in the north in the cold defending the wall now, and I'm going to turn my life around. And he played for a very long time, and he took it very seriously. If he has that moment, the Darren Waller moment or whatever, where he says, you know what, I'm just going to take this incredibly seriously and become the best I could possibly be, then, he could be great. And we've seen guys like Randy Moss be great without even trying. So, but I mean, it's possible. I just worry that it might not happen.
It is. He could be random, but what's interesting is now we're almost into the conversation of where you talk to parents about is sugar a drug? Right now we're getting into that place.
We're the sugar tax segment of the show.
Yeah, now we're into the sugar tax segment where it's well, maybe he's actually doomed because there's no stigma around candy. If there was a stigma around what he was doing, maybe they could have some kind of intervention, but no one's going to have a goddamn candy intervention.
No.
So you want to have a warning
until it's too late and you're Eddie Lacy.
Like a
I don't want any of this shit. I don't care. I'm just saying it's funny that
Toronto Dave in the chat.
The thing that's going to shorten his career is something that the society is not going to lock arms and help him.
Yeah. Toronto Dave in the chat.
He could just keep ordering up Uber Eats and just being 3 bags.
Yeah. Toronto Dave in the chat dropping a Phil Kessel, which is the perfect example of a guy who did not care and just continued to be awesome. So, I mean, it's entirely possible, man.
If DK was awesome, that would be one thing, but I haven't seen him be awesome. Right now, he's 26 and he's theoretically awesome.
Right.
Yeah. So 26, this is your perfect window because the magic number and we have some cool articles coming out about the age apex. Look for those on playerprofiler.com. And it's certainly changed over the years. But usually there's an automatic number for your league mates. Some people it might be 29 for wide receivers. Some people it might be 27. Some people it might be 28. But there's that automatic number that ticks off in people's heads. It's like a car with 90,000 miles. If you're going to buy a used car and it has 90,000, it sounds more appealing than something with 100,000. So it's like those 26, it might not seem old, but you're ticking up. And if he gives you another year of wide receiver 24 with Jackson Smith and Jigba taking a big step forward, like JSN's already ahead of him in Dynasty without doing anything last year. And so, we're at a slippery slope, not to mention the fact that one of Matt Kelly's favorite running backs is Ken Walker, and Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet both could see expanded roles next year under a new coaching staff. So it's we're kind of in purgatory mode with DK Metcalf.
And he's reaching the out in his contract in 2025. So he's going to play out this year, right? And then next year there's an out where he only has $11.5 million in dead cap. So he becomes an interesting sort of expiring contract. And we've seen, you mentioned Randy Moss, players that are underperforming but yet are still viewed as elite by the league, by GMs around the league, just because, hey, this guy's a stud. Come on, have you seen him? Oh my God, right? So this is also a trade candidate, especially if Jackson Smith and Jigba emerges as the target leader and the new alpha next year. Then you could see Metcalf get traded, because they want to be a run first team. They've got Jackson Smith and Jigba. Now all of a sudden DK Metcalf is he's becoming a crank in the locker room, agitating for more targets. You could see all this happening. It's actually very easy to imagine it happening.
I could also see Andrew Cooper switching it up this year with his draft kit entry and not doing DK Metcalf on the draft kit after this one.
I thought I could sneak by with that without having to mention that I was big on DK Metcalf this year. I mean, the thing is, again, like we talked about, it's all there. Like, we've seen him have the monster season, in a season where he broke a lot of tackles and was running more creative routes. I mean, there's no difference. If you look at his 2021 and then his 2022, the only difference was really the broken tackles between him and like what AJ Brown did. But like what I saw this year was a guy that wasn't taking the step forward. He wasn't taking it to another level. And there's a reason why that team drafted another wide receiver. So
he peaked in 2020, right? Yep. 1783. That was his peak air yards, 1,783. The reason I like DK Metcalf, generally speaking, the reason why I've drafted him in Dynasty plenty, again, the insulated value and the air yards. Those are the reasons. But see, then the air yards go down. 1783 to 1600, 1600 again. Now, last year, 1521. So we're already seeing this decline. His average fantasy points per game has been just under 14 the last 3 years. It's like 13.9 the last 3 years. That's not any kind of difference maker for your fantasy team.
And no one has more end zone targets. This guy has double digits end zone targets like 4 straight years. No other player comes close to that. Like Alan Lazard, I guess, was kind of close with Rodgers, but and he's not doing it, right? The hypothetical of a guy with all these air yards and all these end zone targets is like Calvin Johnson, but he's just not converting any of it, which that gets scary, because then you take the opportunity away, it gets worse. Right? Like if you took a true elite player and gave him that opportunity, he led the year before last, he led the league in end zone targets. And he had eight touchdowns, was it? He had 27 end zone targets. He got 8 of them. What the heck?
Yeah.
Matt, how are you going to top Devon Achane with your next sell though?
I don't know if that's possible, dude.
I think I can.
Not possible. You can't.
I think I can. Well, no, I'm not. I have 3 big ones. I have 3 major sells, and I'm not going to try to top that. I'm just going to go to a wide receiver, because we're on that theme right now. We're talking about DK Metcalf. A guy that we have ranked adjacent to DK Metcalf is Nico Collins. And Nico Collins is the type of receiver that I will sell every time, right? A guy who's feasting against beta corners, right? Where based on the situation, he either has a spike week or he duds out, right? And it just so happens that how things shake out and how the season plays out gets a lot of friendly matchups against beta corners, and has injuries to other receivers that are just pushing all the targets in his direction, right? So we have the law of the conservation of targets. He's just soaking up yet more targets after Tank Dell, especially. It took me 6-7 weeks to warm up to Tank Dell because a guy that's 5'5", with unprecedented production from a player of that size. Anytime a player is going to go out and post unprecedented production, I need a minute. Excuse me, I need a minute. Okay, can I have a minute, please, just to process this? So
5'8".
You give me,
on the record.
It's a joke, Theo. It's a joke.
We got it.
He's 5'3". So I had to process this. So now I finally processed it, right? I finally processed for like a week. I have processed Tank Dell. I'm in on Tank Dell, and he's out for the year. And now you have to turn around and be like, no, forget Tank Dell. Took you all year to get, ramped up on Tank Dell. You're finally with the market on Tank Dell, Podfather. Congratulations. But now, no, you have to pivot because this offense is rolling, right? And the targets are funneling now to Nico Collins. You got to get on Nico. I know that Nico wasn't productive at Michigan. He wasn't productive his first 2 years in the league. But now that he's in the perfect spot, the optimal situation to command targets and produce spike weeks, now you need to be all in on that player. And I'm like, wait a second. If I'm not all in on running backs that are situation dependent, hell, if I'm going to be in on a wide receiver who's situation dependent, who for 4 years prior was not in any way impressive as a producer. So I'm going to cherry pick these 8 weeks where he was very fantasy relevant and won people weeks. That's the best part. That's the vividness bias I love with Nico Collins, is that he literally won people weeks. The spike weeks were so big and it was so impressive. And now he has in Dynasty, you have this story of him paired with CJ Stroud for the long run, even though he's on the last year of his deal with the Texans. No one wants to talk about that, right? No one wants to talk about how unproductive he was for 4 years. There's a lot of things about Nico Collins no one wants to talk about. Who he actually produced against. The Colts, I mean, come on, right? It is the easiest call ever to say start Nico Collins against the Colts. So for all those reasons, you stack them up. I am out on Nico Collins. I am in on Tank Dell. For most of these NFL teams, there's going to be one receiver you're truly in on. And for me, I've made the choice. I'm caping up for Tank Dell. I'm out on Nico.
So I'll tell you what, I was in on Nico for redraft, and I like Nico, and I'm currently taking this period to outwardly victory lap, especially on the people that said he was going to be bad. And then I'm quietly doing the same thing as you, Matt, which I'm shopping around and I'm saying, hey, wide receiver 1, right? That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Here's the thing with Nico. The problem that I have is like you said, you look at the quarterback upgrade. We have to ask ourselves, are these wide receivers all tremendous, or is the quarterback really good? I mean, you see Nico Collins having these big games when he has good matchups, bad games against AJ Terrell. But I also watched Noah Brown have back-to-back 150-yard games on this team. Is Noah Brown all of a sudden a star? Because I've seen quite a bit of Noah Brown, or is the quarterback very good? And here's the comp that's going to kind of drive the nail through on Matt's side. I'm siding with Matt a little too much here, Theo. Theo, you're my boy going way back. I'm siding with Matt a ton. I got to say,
he's doing a good job. He's making good arguments.
He's making good arguments. But I'll say this. You go to my timeline, and you go back to 2021 when Nico Collins was drafted, and you can actually see a screenshot that I posted of Player Profiler. And I said, here's my comp for Nico Collins, right? And side by side, you will find a picture of Nico Collins with Kenny Golladay. They both ran a 4.5 40 on the dot. They're both 6'4". Nico's 215, Kenny Galladay's 213. Nico Collins was picked 25 in the third round. Kenny Golladay was picked 32 in the third round. These guys comped to a T, and we watched Kenny Golladay have a monster season with a very good quarterback, and then what happened when he wasn't with that quarterback anymore. So if you are a Nico Collins fan, you need to be writing emails, letters, tweets, knocking on doors, demanding that they extend this player. Calling Bobby Slowick and calling D'Amico Ryans and whoever you can get a hold of and say, please, Nico Collins needs to stay with this team, because if he goes somewhere else, now all of a sudden you're dealing with the Kenny Golladay situation where if he lands with the wrong quarterback, he just disappears into the night.
And so I'll take a neutral approach with Nico Collins. I don't like. I think that he's talented, and I think that this year he took a major year 3 breakthrough. And in the past, year 3 breakthroughs were allowed. You know, Matt, I'm sure 10 years ago you'd love to point out the year 3 breakout guys. So it's allowed. But I hate the argument that the age of Nico versus the age of Tank Dell, you know, matters as much as the fact that it's year 1 versus year 3 production. Like those 2 years of being a pro and being in an NFL system and then finally breaking out in year 3 is way less impressive than a guy like Tank Dell that came and completely lit it up this year. And Tank Dell was on a path to finish as a wide receiver 1 before he got hurt. Now it's kind of a perfect storm where Tank's a buy and Nico's a sell because the market's kind of completely flipped on those guys where like Nico, and he's got a lot more production than this, but I think his 2024 ADP in redraft and best ball, like right now, he's going ahead of Brandon Ayuk. He's going ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. And there's all sorts of guys that I think are more talented that are going behind him now. So you can use that kind of like to your advantage. And also like Coop talked about, and we've talked about with all sorts of guys, the recency bias of Nico having those 190-yard games and then playing well in the NFL playoffs. Like people are treating him like a guy that's kind of a borderline wide receiver 1 now. Like the market's flipped. And I brought up DK Metcalf. I can get DK Metcalf plus something else for Nico. There's plenty of pivot trades out there. But I think for me, it's more Tank Dell is the real deal, broke out earlier. And now the market's kind of flipped and thinks Nico's the outside X that's going to continue to dominate with CJ Stroud. Whereas I look at Tank Dell as this versatile, incredibly fast guy that broke out as a rookie with Stroud, and I'd rather buy Dell. So I'm with Matt on that one. Matt, impressive.
I'm putting
hat.
my player profiler GM hat on. So whenever this is from now on, this is a new bit. From now on, this is my GM hat. Okay. In fact, we should change it to GM. But anyway, I will at some point. Anyway, from now, pretend the P says GM. This is my GM hat. Okay. If I'm the GM of the Texans and I see that my wide receiver room had an underwhelming John Mechie, who's shaping up to be a bust, maybe not his fault, or maybe he was just on a team in Alabama that was inflating everybody's stats. Robert Woods, who is, giving us a couple veteran, grimy, gritty veteran years, and then he's going to be sailing off into the sunset. We've got a couple third rounders. And we've got a franchise quarterback that we want to make sure is supported with a bevy of weapons. Am I going to look at Nico Collins because I have a grandson who's in a fantasy league that tells me he's amazing? And Tank Dell, who is just this incredible Mighty Mouse story, and say, oh, we're good at wide receiver? Right? Or am I going to objectively look at this wide receiver room and go, we need to make sure CJ Stroud is properly supported with big-time weapons? And now what happens when we bring in, this is the landing spot for one of these rookie wide receivers. Any rookie wide receiver goes to the Texans, everyone's going to be salivating. No one is going to look at Nico Collins and go, yeah, I don't know. I love, rookie receiver X, but man, good luck getting past Nico Collins. Fuck out of here.
I tell you, I didn't hear a single thing you said because I was so distracted by the GM hat.
I'll say that I'm a little bit upset because I have player profiler hats, but I don't have the snapback hat.
That's a clean hat.
I would like to have that.
That was a hat that
draft house.
Cody made that hat.
That was
for
a
me.
Cody. Yeah,
it's aggressive hat.
Cody was big into that hat. I remember that hat.
Aggressive hat.
He's got a little a thing on the side. Yeah, this thing is sweet. Yeah, we miss Cody. We're going to be doing more with Cody. I feel like we have some need to tell the audience that Cody's going to be more involved with us than he was in the second half of 2023. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, I'd like to hear what Cody has to say about Nico Collins. Nico Collins strikes me as a player who has a mediocre dog rating, but we'll see what happens. We'll see. I know that Tank Dell has a great dog rating, but we'll talk to Cody a lot about this, about just how he feels about these teams and what he thinks these GMs are going to do. You got to be very careful. It's not like the Texans have a bunch of first rounders at wide receiver and they're good. Like, take your head out of your best ball outcomes from last year and put your GM hat on. That I beg you to do that. If you have an Achane, if you have a Nico, even if you have a Jake Ferguson, these teams are not necessarily done. Like, it's not like Arizona. Arizona hit on a tight end. They hit on Trey McBride in a big way, right? They're good at tight end. They know it. Everybody knows it. That was also, at the time, the first tight end drafted. So we know they know that they're good at tight end. I don't know what the Cowboys think about Jake Ferguson, really. So that's the issue. We don't know what the Texans actually think about Nico Collins. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, Zach Ertz knew. He was like, get me out of here. I'm done, right? Trey McBride, this kid, I don't even want to stand next to this kid. I'm trying to get another job somewhere. So they knew. And let me put my GM hat on, because your segue, a little fantasy alarm action there.
Yeah, fantasy alarm. Like it.
I'll tell you what, for my sell here, and this one's not specifically one player, but it's a situation that I hate. And I think the GM, honestly, for fantasy football, did too good of a job here. I'm looking around at these Packers wide receivers in Dynasty, right? And I'm asking myself, because I'm a win now player. I play to win because I'm good at this. So I don't have any teams that are just like garbage and we're trying to play for a million years from now, right? So I look at this Packers situation, and there are a lot of comps that I see, right? Like, as a player profiler listener, I listened to Matt Kelly back when he was talking about Chris Godwin, and he said, look, this is a good player, but right now he's stuck behind Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson and to some degree Adam Humphries. And the moment Deshaun Jackson is gone, he's going to blow up. And guess what? I mean, out of that, I don't even think you would have predicted him to be wide receiver 2 in that third year like he was. But you were in, right?
Oh,
and that's the way. That's the way I look at it.
Godwin was a smash.
Right, he was a smash, and we were just waiting for the pieces to fall away, right? With JSN, we're waiting for that same thing with Tyler Lockett. And I look at a guy like Jaden Reed, and I feel that way to some degree. But I ask myself, do I have the time in these leagues where I'm competing now? Do I have the time to wait for that? And do I want to play the guessing game with Christian Watson and Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs and Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft when all these guys are under contract through not only 2024, but also 2025? This could just be a situation where they mix and match these guys, where Jaden Reed, the guy that I personally like best for long-term, is coming off the field in 2 wide receiver sets like he was all year this year. So I look at how these guys are getting steamed up so aggressively. And I say to myself, what if Jordan Love just is really good? And maybe Bo Melton isn't amazing. And maybe Dontavian Wicks isn't a super mega star. And I'm potentially looking to sell a couple of these guys if I'm competing now. Now, if you're a long-term guy and you're just looking to stack up cheap assets or whatever, or you're able to add them, then maybe you do wait and hope that it ends up being like the Steelers, back the Super Bowl Steelers team, where it was like they had too many good players. They had Emmanuel Sanders and Hines Ward, right, and Antonio Brown. And they all kind of went to, Emmanuel Sanders left and he was still good. And Mike Wallace left and he was still good. And then Antonio Brown could break out. Maybe it is a situation where they're all amazing and eventually guys will leave and then they'll all be focal points. But for the next year or even 2, I have a difficult time saying to myself, this one guy is going to be tremendous and everybody else is just going to fall away. I mean, none of those players, for as good as the offense was, they didn't have a single guy that finished as a wide receiver 2. Because
they need a nickname. I think they need a nickname. This wide receiver, I guess, quintet needs a nickname. Like, they called themselves Young Money.
The Quints.
Right? So Sanders, Wallace, and Brown, they had a nickname. They called themselves Young Money, and it was a cool nickname, right? So I think that the Packers need to do that. And I agree. I love Jaden Reed, but Jaden Reed did too well, unfortunately. In some ways, he performed too well. He's not going to be as attainable in best ball this year. It's unfortunate. He's going to get steamed to the moon. I can already see it. Everything is falling into place for him. He is oozing those Chris Godwin vibes. He is. He's that the modern NFL slot flanker that can do it all. He's going to get those extra touches in the running game. He's going to get those touches on gadget plays. Plus, he can do everything else. He's a special player. But also, there's Christian Watson, and Christian Watson's another level up of physical specimen. And for whatever reason, this team likes Romeo Doubs, and I can't stop it. And I like Bo Melton. Look at Bo Melton's measurables on PlayerProfiler.com. That guy looks like a great football player. Dontavian Wicks actually had some of the most impressive plays of the year during the 2023 season. So I agree with you. There's a possibility that Love regresses. I don't think he will. But there's a strong case to be made to just say, hey, I'm just going to fade all these Packers receivers with the exception of a Melton, right? I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to stash Melton, and that's it. That's going to be my guy. Maybe you could flag play it on Musgrave. I wouldn't blame you at all. Musgrave fits the profile that we love. And then basically say, hey, I don't treat players as precious, especially when you get a guy in the late second round of a rookie draft, and he's everything that you thought he was. To trade him takes guts. Because he's not getting you back like top 10 dynasty receiver, first round plus value in return. But you might say, I'm running the numbers, and the probability this guy delivers and exceeds expectations in 2024 is actually below 50% based on where expectations are now, because the guy was too damn good last year.
And then what I'm thinking, my plan is to buy him later. Like, I'm sitting back and I'm saying, Jaden Reed, I got my eyes on these guys. I'm watching them, these guys in the cheese bin over there. And I'm saying, okay, in 2020, at the end of 2024, 2025, when I have a plan, when I see how it's panning out, just as you saw it with God, when you were like, here we go, it's coming, because these guys are going to fall away, and then he's going to be an every down player, right? Like, you need to step up and be a flanker in 2 wide receiver sets and a slot guy in 3 wide receiver sets like Cooper Kupp and Keenan Allen. The moment I see that is about to happen, then I'm buying. But buy now, after every guy on the team scored 8 touchdowns, is, it's kind of problematic. And Joe Carlton in the chat kind of makes a good point that if you do believe in Christian Watson, now's the time to buy him. Because you can buy
him for cheap. Christian Watson's super cheap right now. But I'll say
cheap.
Is he that cheap? See, this is the thing. You guys are a little more, because I am the CEO and I'm not in as many leagues as you guys. Some of these things catch me off guard. Right? Some
Christian
of these sort of
really
real cheap league trends, like what Joe Carlton's talking about. I had no idea. The fickle fantasy gamer never ceases to surprise me, because I'm like, wait, you guys loved him 3rd round redraft last year. What do you mean you're out on him? What happened? What do you do? He got hurt? What? His quarterback is way better than anyone thought he was going to be. Now you're out? Like, these are the things that, like, I don't understand. Like, I just want to shake dynasty gamers sometimes.
I'll make a little pushback on Coop's Jaden Reed sell, though. I don't think the market has steamed on Jaden Reed like I anticipated it would. I think, like, the touchdowns, the manufactured touches, the big games that he's had, scores a touchdown on Thanksgiving, like, did everything he should have done for a 2nd round pick. But for whatever reason, the market's just not there for him, like we're seeing for some of these other guys going into their 2nd year. So I feel like you'd be selling. It's almost like a neutral. It's a neutral move, if anything, unless you think that he's somehow a Jahan Dotson that's going to really, really regress. Because, Coop, you brought it up with me. The thing about Jaden Reed is, earlier in the year, the snaps were not there. He's got potential to take a big step forward in terms of his snaps. And if he becomes an every down player, like, he's the kind of guy, the sort of skill set that takes big leaps forward in fantasy. And you guys bring up other guys on the team where they're a little bit superfluous. Like Dontavian Wicks, what we get from Wicks is sort of like what we got from Watson. They're big, physical outside guys. Like Romeo Doubs is kind of his own guy, where, we don't like him with all the metrics, but for what like Jordan Love really likes him and he's producing. Bo Melton, a really super hyper athletic guy. Jaden Reed is the most versatile wide receiver, the guy they gave the highest draft, well, besides Watson, the highest draft capital, second round pick. And they gave him manufactured touches when Jones was out. All those rushing attempts. So I don't know. I'd be a little weary of selling him because I don't think you're getting a first round pick for him in a single quarterback league.
That's why I prefaced it the way I did. That I like Jaden Reed long term, right? I like Jaden Reed long term. I like JSN long term. I like Josh Downs long term. These guys that I believe that can transcend from a pure slot receiver to a wide receiver that plays flanker and slot. Tank Dell's already done it. The CeeDee Lamb rookie year is the best example of a pure slot wide receiver playing more 75 or 80% of his snaps out of the slot that we've seen. And he finished at wide receiver 24. Very rarely do these pure guys finish, wide receiver 1s or 2s. Tyler Boyd very briefly was a guy that played every down and he had the 1,000-yard seasons. Then they got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and he went back to being a part-time player. Jaden Reed, I want to be there when he has that ascension. But when I look at these contracts, and I look at Doubs and Watson, who were the full-time outside guys when they're healthy. And even when Watson was out, they used Wicks outside. So I look at it and I say, when does that happen, right? So if I have him now and I'm trying to win this year, maybe I do. Sometimes you do have to sell players you like to win now. If I can go out and he's my wide receiver 3 and I can trade him for a guy that I think is a better redraft player this year, I will. If I don't have him, then I'm waiting and I'm going to go.
Give your stat. You had a wild stat on the salaries, the combined salaries of the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, it would drop that like a week or two ago. If you can find that was worth mentioning. It was like the combined salaries of every single
the combined salaries. The combined salaries of Dontavian Wicks, Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Bo Melton, and Malik Heath. Add them all together, and Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. Add them all together, and their cap hit next year is lower than the cap hit for just Allen Lazard.
It's a beautiful thing. And Brian and Matt, you got to go, Brian. Yeah,
I swear. You add them all up, and it's just under 13 million, and the cap hit for Allen Lazard is 13.2.
Holy cow!
Yeah, the entirety. Bro.
Tweet that after the show. We'll retweet that because that's a fantastic stat.
It's an incredible stat. Matt, here, I have some real talk for you. The underlying reason why I'm entertaining this notion of potentially trading my man Jaden Reed, who I caped up for incredibly hard. He didn't deliver like Roschon did, right? He delivered where Roschon fell short, right? So he and Roschon were my guys from the Senior Bowl. Roschon, I think, is the classic guy that you need to have going into this season. I know we're not. This is supposed to be a landmine show, but whatever the reverse landmine is, Roschon is a reverse landmine. Okay, that is. You're not going to find a better player at value at the running back position this year. Reverse landmine. I just made up the term. Great. So think about the teams that Jordan Love had in his division and what their secondaries look like. And if you are, hold on.
Out the GM hat.
Had to get the GM hat back on. So I'm a GM of the Vikings. I'm a GM of the Bears. I'm a GM of the Lions. Where am I going to invest in the draft this year? Cornerback, secondary, slot corner, safety. Those are the positions that those teams are going to be focused. We'll see what happens with Jordan Love. We'll see what happens. We'll see. He had a first half of the season where he had the lowest ball placement accuracy of any quarterback in the NFL. We will see what happens with Jordan Love. It's not a complete picture of a stud quarterback. I do not see a complete picture yet. I see it being colored in, right? I see the pieces coming together. I see the lines being drawn. I don't see a complete picture yet. So that's another case for just this Packers offense exceeded expectations. And they're going to be in a situation next year where the defenses in their division are going to adjust.
Yeah, I mean, and again, to me personally,
someone needs to do a.
If you can sell Wicks, if you can sell Dubs, those are the guys I actually want. Like, those are the ones that I was more talking about in this situation. Reed, though, too. I mean, if you got to win. People forget that the whole goal is to win this year. If you can win this year, then do it. Sometimes you got to trade away.
I'm also fine waiting and seeing on Watson. Watson might be a buy low trap for this reason. So it's potential. Sorry, Joe. I know you're an expert, Joe Carlton, but it's not. That's a player where sometimes you have a buy low trap where you're like, I'm just gonna reflexively buy all the guys that were hyped up last year and face planted the hardest. I mean, he was of all the early round wide receivers, Christian Watson was the biggest bust of all of them.
By far. Yeah, and he was going right around Debo, right around Keenan Allen.
It was a travesty. So if you just draft the biggest bust from the previous year, that's also a system that I can get behind, right? But there are headwinds for, and I'm not going to say the thing. I'm not going to say TMMF. I don't say that. I'd never say it, and I'm not going to say it. I don't want to say it. You can't get me to say it, but in this particular case, we could be in a situation where there are maybe too many.
Say it.
There may be.
No, don't do it. Don't say it. Don't say it.
Jayden Reed's that good.
Pivot to Snap Crunch.
But there's a lot of
pivot to Snap Crunch.
Cliche alert yourself, Matt.
I didn't go there. I promise I
but
wouldn't.
I'll say this. Simply.
I didn't finish. I didn't finish the pronunciation.
Okay, guys. All right, it was close to a cliche alert from the Podfather. A rare.
It's close. No, we can do a partial
alert.
one in the podcast. I'll do a partial one.
And shout out to the chat. The chat is lit. Make sure you smash the like button. Truce way more regularly. This is Dynasty. Partial cliche alert.
The partial.
I might have to sneak in a cliche just to get a full-on cliche alert.
Too many mouths to feed.
There it is.
There it is.
I said fee. I did not finish. I did not say the whole thing.
So I'm going to go with, for my next sell, my next landmine, this is a player where very similarly ranked to DK Metcalf. And this is a guy who scored exceptionally well this year, giving us sort of another trade window to sell high. And that's Deebo Samuel. And guys, Deebo Samuel is 28, but like the way that he puts his body on the line and takes hits, that's not the kind of 28-year-old that I want to invest in my dynasty rosters. This is like Billy Muzio's favorite player. This is a guy who, if you drafted him this year, you got great return on investment. Huge weeks. But you have Brandon Ayuk, who keeps developing.
Oh, no.
Did we lose him here?
Here's the thing. Theo has been very proud of his new internet setup. He was very proud of his new internet.
I think this is definitely Billy's throttling it. Once the Deebo came up, Billy stepped in and cut the cords. He's throttling this Deebo take.
I've seen an incredible number of consecutive shows that Theo has put together on this channel with no glitches whatsoever. And now when he has a big show with the Podfather, Andrew Cooper, 100+ live listeners, he glitches.
It's a conspiracy, man. I think it's Billy, dude. It has to be. He's behind the scenes. He doesn't want these takes to get out there because they're dangerous, and they might be true. So
he's a 49er fan. He wishes he was on the show with us. There's a lot of reasons why a resentful Billy Muzio could be behind this.
That's right.
Deebo Samuel. The funny thing about a guy like Deebo Samuel, which is a double-edged sword, like Jayden Reed. A guy like Jayden Reed, when he gets to age 28, you're going to want to get out because the body's going to take a toll. All those extra carries and all those extra touches, it's the versatility dilemma, right? where, yeah, the versatility actually props up your value, but then when you turn 28, it's a thing that drags you down.
Right. If you look at Antonio Brown, like people always, they remember the big hit from Perfect, right? That's what everyone remembers, but they forget that for years he avoided contact and seemingly somehow would catch the ball over the middle of the field, get 20 yards and go out of bounds, right? So when you're a wide receiver, you can catch the ball 5-6 times and never get tackled once. You know, you catch a touchdown, catch your first down, you go out of bounds. When you're getting handoffs, especially when you're getting them out of the backfield, you're going to find linebackers, man. You're going to find big boys on the line of scrimmage. Like you're getting tackled by defensive ends. You look at, when are normal wide receivers getting tackled by defensive ends? Almost never. So yeah, that is the rub with these guys. There's a reason Curtis Samuel gets hurt every single year, and they're putting him in harm's way a lot of times with these situations. And I'll tell you what, the other thing is that those type players, great in best ball, right? But playing in any individual week, can you really sit down and say, you know what? I think Deebo Samuel has a rushing touchdown today. Very difficult thing to just kind of pinpoint where and when that's going to happen, right? Like
I love a good figure of speech, a good catchphrase, a new catchphrase that we can use, new concept. That's not a cliche. Kevin Imami. Kevin Imami's he's an OG. He's a patron. He's in our patron leagues. Patreon.com/Podfather, and he came up with a brand new term for Jaden Reed and Deebo Samuel, the double-edged Swiss Army knife.
Wow.
It's clean. A double-edged Swiss Army knife. The versatility is amazing, but you want to be out by age 28.
Kevin, I got goosebumps. Right, you can see it. I have goosebumps right now for the double-edged Swiss Army knife. I mean, man, that's exactly it. It's scary. And you can use that in many ways, right? The injuries, the unpredictability of it, right? Man.
We're with you, Theo. Bottom line, Theo, we're with you. Are you with us? Are you back?
I'm back. And Podfather, you are dropping, you're due to drop one more Dynasty Landmine, one more cell on the audience.
What about Andrew?
We all did too. I did the entire.
We all did too. You're onto your third.
Okay. I want to make sure everyone.
I thought we were going to do players.
I want to make sure.
Should we end with some positivity with some players?
Let's end with some positivity. That's a good point.
So give us a buy, Matt.
No. I gotta tell you my final sell. I just want to make sure. I'm differential to the guest. Okay.
Prince of Darkness.
I want to make sure that he has exhausted his sells that he wanted to get off his chest today. My final sell is the easiest sell of all, and that's Kyren Williams. So imagine a player whose production was almost entirely situation-based, not necessarily due to his talent. No one that saw him at Notre Dame was like, oh, this guy's the next-level player in the NFL, right? No, right? It was a very good, solid running back at Notre Dame. So far in the league, through first season, solid backup. He was not necessarily a player that the team liked, but wasn't going to vault him over Darrell Henderson in his rookie year. But it was a whisper campaign. You heard the whisper campaign. We like him. The coaches like him. And then Cam Akers gets traded, and it's like, oh, now they love him. And the coaches like players for lots of different reasons. You know who the coaches love in Detroit? Craig Reynolds. Okay? They love Craig Reynolds. Okay?
Fourth and goal playoff game on the line. You got to give the ball to Craig Reynolds, right?
You got to give it to Craig Reynolds. They love Craig Reynolds.
I can't believe they did that.
And that's fine. If you have Rob Havenstein and Steve Avila, then you're going to be able to create wide running lanes, and thank God, right? Thank God. You happen to be a running back. If you have a running back is dropped into a situation where you have elite guard play and you have these road grader offensive linemen that can stay healthy, even if your team doesn't have any depth whatsoever, right? And they go and they draft Puka Nacua to keep Matthew Stafford upright. Matthew Stafford was supposed to be hanging on by a thread of a fiber of his nerve ending in his neck. And the next thing I know, he's totally reliable, super productive, and predictable fantasy asset. And I'm like, wait a second. I thought no one was even drafting this guy because they were terrified he was going to retire. What happened to this? Wasn't he in the hospital? Wasn't he had a whole reason with his family that he wanted to step away for his own health, his family's health? Wasn't there just this list of reasons why Matthew Stafford may not be in the league next year? Now it's like it's all forgotten. It's all forgotten. Matthew Stafford's here to stay. Matthew Stafford's a long-term asset. The Rams have turned it all around, even though they hollowed out their whole team, right? They just happen to stay healthy, and they had great run blocking, and Kyren Williams was airdropped in at the very perfect time to put up big numbers in the exact right situation. But if you take a step back and you go to PlayerProfiler and you say, what is Kyren Williams? He's relatively small, he's relatively slow, and he's never been an explosive playmaker at any level. He just happened to be the guy that was there when there was a vacuum of opportunity on a team that was putting up points. But you've got Cooper Kupp in his 30s. You've got Matthew Stafford on the back end of his career. You've got an offensive line that is an injury away from being, going from top 10 to bottom 10. That's how shallow that offensive line is. The Rams were very fortunate this year that this fragile, shallow roster that they have, which is a consequence of not having any early picks in the draft for years and years, and they didn't suffer any of the consequences due to just pure luck. That's the situation in which Kyren Williams was able to thrive this year, be a top 5 producer at the position, in a year where the entire position underwhelmed across the board. If you weren't Christian McCaffrey, you were a running back that missed expectations. In that context, steps always somebody, a guy, a Justin Forsett, someone is gonna step into that void in fantasy football, right? We need a hero. And last year, it was Raheem Mostert, undrafted, double-digit round pick in fantasy football. It was day 3 pick, double-digit pick in if not undrafted in fantasy, Kyren Williams. These guys will always emerge every year, and it is our job, it is our duty as Dynasty gamers to not believe that we've just stumbled upon the next great long-term asset at the position. Take that James Robinson and flip him.
I just don't understand how his agent didn't have him pull the fake injury move to not go to the combine. Because if he knew he was going to be that underweight and that slow, you don't show up, right? Like, he lost so much draft capital just by showing up, dude. With Kyren Williams, it doesn't make sense. Like, I picture, Wayne Knight's character in Space Jam when he gets his hand on the ball and he's like, I may not be tall, but I'm slow. Like, that's Kyren Williams. He doesn't hit any of the barriers we need him to clear. He's not big. He's not fast. So I worry, man. Those guys worry me. And I would hang on to him if people were being reasonable about it. But boy, the steam on him, Theo. Where are you seeing him go? Where did he go in your little exercise with Jax the other day?
Okay, so there's a disconnect though. There's a disconnect with that was only year 1, year 2 guys. So Kyren,
okay.
Year 3 doesn't count, but that's a Drop to Dynasty Life with Jax Falcone. Highly recommend that one. But guys, I'll say the steam hasn't caught up in Dynasty with Kyren. Like, the Dynasty market's a little bit more wise to this. I'm not seeing any kind of Godfather trades go down with Kyren Williams, and I think it's sort of like a standoff on both sides. Where James Robinson, there was more James Robinson trades despite the year 1 production because the guy was undrafted. And I realized Kyren was a late round pick, but still being drafted kind of separates him a little more. You also have the fact that it was year 2 with Kyren where, they wanted to use him as a rookie. There was a scheme on the waiver side where people thought he was going to break in as a rookie, and then, that didn't happen. So it's a really weird case, Matt. I would say in theory,
I think it reminds me of 4, 5, 6 years ago, where really the only top running back that delivered that year was Le'Veon Bell. And then the next guy that was producing in the second half at 20 fantasy points per game plus was Dion Lewis. Yeah. Dion Lewis was a 195-pound satellite back who was very productive in college, even though he had a lower weight. He was, had a ton of catches, so he showed himself to be a great receiver in college, and a dominant producer. And in an 8-game sample, the Patriots used him as a primary back, and you needed him if you were going to compete with the Le'Veon Bell teams that year, just like you needed Kyren Williams to compete with the Christian McCaffrey teams in 2023. And I understand that, but that's the type of running back we're talking about, right? Dion Lewis was more athletic than Kyren Williams.
How many times have we seen this, though? Like, what did he do that
many times
Philip Lindsay didn't do? What did he do that Jordan Howard, Alfred Morris had 1,500 yards? I mean, it's hard for me to buy
Alfred Morris.
Well, those are different cases. I don't want to talk like the Jordan Howard and the Alfred Morris is the grinder backs. Yeah. That's another conversation. We have running backs we can talk about in that classification, though they're becoming fewer and fewer. Right? We're going to see more and more of these Kyren Williams as the sensibilities of coaches change. The coaches are getting younger. They're paying more attention to probabilities and analytics, and they're more likely, like with Mike McDaniel, to play sub 200-pound backs more snaps. That's definitely a trend that's happening. But it's not going to be a trend that we see like take over the league, and you're going to start to see a guy like Kyren Williams get 300 carries. That's not happening. Kyren Williams also, though he was a target magnet in college, it's interesting that his route participation rate was 61%. So he ran a ton of routes, but his target share was 11.5%. For a running back, that's good, but that's not great. He was number 18 in target share on PlayerProfiler, ranked number 4 in route participation. So that tells me that he's not a target commander, especially when you have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua on the team. The reason why he scored so many goddamn fantasy points is 60 red zone touches in 12 games. 60 red zone touches in 12 games. If you just fade TD rate on every player, right? You take the players like a Devon Achane and a Kyren Williams, and you don't know anything. You're doing it blind. You trade the guys with the highest TD rate. You're going to come out ahead. Every year you're going to come out ahead. We talked about this with Christian Watson last year. Like, this TD rate is ridiculous. It's unsustainable. And then what happened? He was the biggest bust of the early round wide receivers.
I mean, he was on pace. It doesn't even make sense when you look at his like per game pace and what he would have had if he played every game. Like, we're talking 320 something carries, right? He had over 200. He had almost 230 carries in 12 games. Like, if they love the running game so much, then what you do is you go out and get another running back and you supplement that instead of just trying to feed this one guy. What team ever just goes out and says, "Oh, we got our fifth round pick, our day 3 running back, and we're just going to feed him forever." Right?
That's like, what I'm saying. I mean,
it doesn't work that way.
If I, again, put on my Les Snead hat, I have a Les Snead GM hat. One of my biggest needs going into the draft is running back. Facts. One of my biggest needs in free agency is running back. When they go out and sign Josh Jacobs.
No, don't do it.
I'm going
to laugh.
I'm going to laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. Now, I don't think Josh Jacobs is a McVay-style running back, so I don't see it happening. But that's the type of thing where you look up and the news comes in and you're like, wait a second, what about Kyren? Oh, damn it. The GM does not view running. The GM's like, we just lost Cam Akers. You got to think about the GM. We lost Cam Akers. We have no one behind Kyren Williams, and he's 195 pounds. I'm going to prioritize getting a prototypical primary back in the NFL. That is how the GM's going to think. He's not going to think, he scored 21.5 fantasy points per game last year. That's not how they think.
Ask Damian Pierce about that. He got vaporized by Devin Singletary.
Yeah, but come on, guys. Kyren gave you multiple 30-point weeks. This is not Damian Pierce.
And I say thank you very much as I shut the door behind him. Thank you for stopping by.
With a Kyren Williams, I just want to be very clear. I don't care how much steam there is, right? It's a very different situation. With Jaden Reed, you better be getting a first-round pick.
Yes.
Right? If you can't, you're not trading him. Fuck that. Like, he's good, and he's going to be good for a long time. So I need to see steam before I'm interested. I don't care. I am out on Kyren Williams. I'm trading him for whatever the market will offer. I'm taking that offer. I'm out 100%. You could not. There's not a world where I'm starting the 2024 season with any Kyren Williams in my portfolio in any format. I mean, if there was a player, and I don't usually, it's like, hey, if a guy's in the first round, you need to get some exposure to him. Billy and I have had long conversations about this exposure management on the Dominator show. Kyren Williams would be the first player on the ADP list where I would be comfortable with a 0% exposure in every league, in every format. A player I wouldn't touch, and I'd be fine with it because no one could reasonably make the argument, no, this is a player that can repeat what he did last year. He can beat you this year. You can't take the risk, right? Just like with Bijan, I'm not taking the risk. I'm fading him, but I want a few percentage points of Bijan in all my portfolios in seasonal leagues. That was a conversation Billy and I had because everyone's like, you guys don't have Bijan in the first round in your rankings. This is wrong. And we're like, no, it's right. You're wrong. But we didn't say don't draft him. He could beat you. His best case outcome is league winning. So you definitely need to be in on some Bijan Robinson. It's highly unlikely. That's not Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams isn't Bijan Robinson. He's not even in the same universe. Right? So there's no possibility. I'm saying it right now. I'm saying it very clearly on January 25th, 2024. It's not possible that Kyren Williams can beat you this year. You need to be very comfortable having absolutely zero Kyren Williams starting now and throughout the summer.
That's the true difference between a Jaden Reed, who we think down the road can be a full-time player, but we're maybe selling him now if we're win now, versus a Kyren Williams or somebody that's a true landmine where we say there's a real risk this player, you're going to sit there and say, do I have to drop this guy within a year or two? So
because I know for a fact, I've seen the trades where Kyren Williams is commanding a first-rounder in return.
Oh, you can get a first-rounder plus.
Exactly. But so as soon as I see that, I know, okay, I'm safe. This is not going to burn me. Like everyone in the chat's like, Malik Neighbors. There's a big, giant groundswell of Malik Neighbors support across fantasy football and dynasty circles right now, and it's in our chat. It's infiltrating our chat. Yeah, I would take that trade all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. Malik Neighbors for Kyren Williams. Let's go.
Sign me up.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.